Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Wealth of Distance Education and ENG4C. Yesterday, we left you with key questions 24 and 25. 24 was asked you to determine the criteria of writing a good business letter. And then in key question 25, you were asked to actually write one of those yourself. And to do that, you would follow the RAF model, which we discussed yesterday. You'd have to, your role would be a character from the novel. Your audience would be to an individual business or institution relevant to that character in the novel. The format would be a business letter, so it could be any of the three that we looked at yesterday. Um, that is a letter of complaint, inquiry, or something that a cover letter that you would include with a resume. And then the topic, the topic of purpose must be relevant to the character, of course. For example, to request information about a social service or complain about a business or a service or complain about inequitable treatment. All right, so make sure that your business letter follow these criteria. That is, it should follow either the format of a cover letter, inquiry letter, or complaint letter. It should convey information in a way that is concise and direct, as all good business letters should be. It uses a voice that is appropriate for the intended audience and purpose. So it must fit right into what's happening in the novel. And then, of course, it has to be free from spelling, punctuation, and grammatical errors. There's a template there on the following page, page 26, that you can use. So today we're going to move on. We'll finish up on activity 2 with key question 26, another novel analysis questioning character. So let's read through this. Write 500 words by responding to the following prompt. Characters are sometimes described as being round or flat. Round characters have multiple character traits, such as they are trustworthy or indecisive or brave, while flat characters only have one character trait. Another way to think of this is the difference between complex characters versus stereotypical characters. Flat characters are two-dimensional in that they are relatively uncomplicated and do not change throughout the course of work. By contrast, round characters are complex and undergo development sometimes sufficiently to surprise the reader. So think about it. Are the main characters in your novel round, complex, or flat, stereotypical? Maybe you have a mixture. Find at least 3 specific examples from your novel to support your answer. Be sure to explain how the examples you use support your assertion that your characters are round or flat, including page numbers for references. Okay, so we're going to go into a bit more detail about these because chances are you are familiar with this terminology, and it wasn't included in the unit itself, but I do have some additional information here I'll share with you. Let's see now. Let's go to there and here. All right. So, Round and flat characters are defined based on the depth of their traits. Round characters are multidimensional and complex, whereas flat characters are two-dimensional and typically have minimal traits. Round characters are usually dynamic characters, and flat characters are usually static characters. Round characters are true to life, as people in real life are complex, not defined by a single trait. Readers find complex characters much more interesting than simple ones. Interactions between round and flat characters create suspense. As a result of those interactions is what helps develop the main character. Readers become interested in how the character responds. Authors want the readers to identify and sympathize or empathize with the characters they create. Characters who have virtues and vices are often more memorable to the reader. Flat characters show the complexity of the main character and are often the reason for conflicts without which the protagonist would not develop. Oh, I said share. It's show. Okay? I messed up on that. Flat characters show the complexity of the main character, right? Sorry for confusing you here, but this is very important to remember. A term such as dramatic foil, right? So a dramatic foil is someone who is, in the story, and their main purpose is to show something in the protagonist, something about their character. As a dramatic foil, flat characters embody the opposite traits of the round character. Readers, before understanding each character, as the lack of qualities in the character, flat character helps to emphasize the ones present in the round character, and for sure, they can often affect and influence that character. Sometimes authors use flat characters as a way to provide background information creatively. These characters can provide backstory to develop the plot and pull readers into the story. Authors develop their protagonists as round characters, as their main trait is their ability to change. Round protagonists are multifaceted, multidimensional characters and have complex personalities, so they are more likely to develop throughout a story. Authors focus on detailing their round character struggles and internal conflicts. They reveal the character's motivations, which helps to develop their complexity. Round characters are typically also dynamic characters, meaning they undergo significant change and character development throughout a text. An archetype is a stereotypical example of a group whittled down into a single character. Examples include the hero, the sage, and the jester. A flat character represents the main character trait attributed to the stock character. The antagonist hinders the progression of the plot, ultimately standing in the way of the protagonist. Since stories focus on the growth of the protagonist, writers naturally construct a one-dimensional antagonist. However, modern writers are more actually to create an antagonist with more depth. Flat characters are typically also static characters, meaning that they do not undergo a significant change by the end of the story. Okay, so like in our examples, Uh, the Joker, for instance. Now, there's a antagonist, right? The Joker in Batman series, but he has some kind of depth to him, doesn't he? Especially in the movie that they made about the Joker himself, and we learn all about his struggles as growing up. And the thing about it is that he was a bad dude from the beginning of the story and a bad dude at the end. So he does not really make much of a change. And Batman, for instance, goes through the same type of change, right? Because his the effects and influences of his past, his seeing his father killed, well, he has quite a well, I guess I could call it a vicious streak to him. He could very easily kill just about anybody, even though he's a good guy, right? He struggles with that. It's very complex character. So, there's a lot of flexibility in character types, but we create this difference here to make it easier for us to understand what is the purposes of the main character, and by understanding that change in a main character, then we will have an idea of what the story is about, the theme of the story, because we will understand all the different crises that he's going through. Okay, so I wanted to give you a little bit more of an explanation. You can think of if you sit back and think of all the movies and movies you've seen and stories that you've read. And think about that. Think about which characters had that multi-dimensionality um, um, about them, right? And as it mentions in this text, that generally they're the protagonist, the person who the story is about. And then there's a number of people that help develop that character. And they do it in a number of different ways. Um, in James Fry's book, um, he meets a psychiatrist or a social worker. He meets another criminal in the drug rehab. Um, these people all have a big influence on him being able to fight his drug addiction. There's also Lily. She is the tenderness and love that she shows towards him, right? And he grows from that. And then you have to think about how all these other characters change, right, in the actual story. Uh, the people working at the institution, they don't really change that much. We don't know that much about them. But, in the case of Lily, I mean, she is a little more complicated, right? And so therefore a little more dynamic than the other characters. But, well, there's a great debate on on her actually uh, being or that she actually changes from the beginning or where James Fry meets her to the end of the novel. But you'd have to read the novel yourself to fully understand that, but I know a lot of my students like that novel. All right, if you have any questions at all about round and flat characters and how they fit into the plot and dynamics of the novel, just ask me and we can discuss it. I've read all of the novels in this course, so I have a good idea of who fits in where and how you can approach it. Okay, let's close that now. I might as well close that. Okay, um, now we can move on to the next activity, reading graphics. In this activity, you'll learn about different types of graphics, their features, purpose, and what makes them effective. You'll also learn some strategies for reading graphics. Next, you'll find two examples. Next, you will find two examples of graphics, one effective example and one ineffective example, and share them with your peers. Finally, you will write a blog post for the third section of the novel. Once again, it's not actually a blog post, it's just analysis of the novel, evaluating how realistically issues are presented in the novel. All right, so let's go on to the content here. In this activity, you will continue reading your novel. Good. Hopefully, you might have it done soon. That's really important as we're coming to the end. Well, we're halfway through Unit 3 here. But let's look at another form of communication, and those are graphics. Graphics are text such as diagrams, tables, charts, and graphs that provide information in a form that is often more efficient than writing alone. Graphic text usually use a structure that helps to organize the information in an efficient way. For example, including details in a table allows the reader to compare across categories. If the graphic text accompanies paragraphs, the graphics help to clarify and or provide additional information to the writing. So following is the criteria for effective graphics. They must have visual appeal. Graphics have to be clear and eye-catching, or the reader might just ignore them. They must have labels. Your reader needs to be able to quickly and easily identify information. They must have titles. Titles should identify the information depicted in the graphic. They should have a clear proximity to the text. Graphics need to be close to the information they are clarifying. That's one thing I have seen in text before where the graphic is like 3 pages away from the actual text that it's identifying, and it's a little confusing. They must have compactness. If graphics don't say space, then they're not very useful or helpful. So we're going to take a look at different types of graphics now and look at the criteria for each individual type. So tables, we've seen lots of tables. We see tables in our unit. Our assessment tools such as rubrics, look very much like tables. So here's the explanation of this type of graphic. When data is organized into columns and rows, you have a table. A writer might use this to condense a large amount of information into a smaller space. It also allows the writer to communicate different pieces of information that fall into the same categories, such as a course calendar for a college or university. And that's what we have up there as our example. Community courses, there's the title right there, nice and clear, right at the top of the graphic. Community courses, autumn 1997. On the left, we have the titles, or sorry, in the next row, we have the titles of the different columns, course name, course tutor, summary, the code, and the fee. So all the important information you need if you are debating on whether or not to take this course. And we have three different courses here after the Civil War: the introduction to Anglo-Saxon England, and the glory that was Greece. And we have the tutors for each of them, and then the summary of the course. Of course, we'll need the course code when we're applying, and also it's a good idea to check out how much it's going to cost. Okay, that's our first type of graphic. The next one is charts and flowcharts. They show relationships between elements. Flowcharts indicate a sequence of steps. They might, or you might use a flowchart to explain a procedure to someone, such as how to close up a store at the end of the day. Here's an example immediately to the right. Okay, so up here is the start button. Now, I find a little bit of a problem with this particular chart is there's no titling. We don't really know what it is about to start off with here. But then as we go through this flowchart, we follow the arrows, we start to get an understanding of what this is, right? It's start, alarm rings, this looks like some kind of action symbol, ready to get up, and then we have two options here, yes or no, and the arrows point to different boxes. Either you climb out of bed, and that's the end, or if it's no, you hit the snooze button, back to relay, and then back to alarm rings. Okay, so each of these symbols, I guess that's the one that I said with an action one, is actually a decision symbol, this stretched out triangle here. These are actions, these are things that are actually happening. Alarm rings, climb out of bed, hit the snooze button. On to the next page, we also use diagrams. Diagrams are simple line drawings that represent an object. You might find line drawings in textbooks or in manuals for things like cars and appliances. Diagrams can also be in 2D, that's two-dimensional, or 3D. The adjacent diagram is an example of a 3D diagram. And this is a drawing of a plant cell structure with all the different organelles, I guess you would call them, inside that structure, right? We have the nucleus and nucleolus and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. I remember all of these from biology, yeah. Mitochondria. So you've probably seen lots of these in biology textbooks or other science textbooks. Another useful graphic are timelines. Timelines show an order of events that are most often used to indicate important dates for an historical event. That should be a historical event or in the development of a product. So the example here we have is a decade of influential technology. Pretty Windows based, right? Elon Musk, not Elon Musk, he wasn't involved with Windows. um, there's other elements here other than Windows or Xbox. Windows XP 2001, Verizon launches the first US 3G network in 2002, and then up we go for year after year here. Now, timelines don't always have to have an entry each year or each month or each day. They can be scattered. So Microsoft Office came out in 2003. Facebook launched in 2004. Wow, that was only 20 years ago. It seems like it's been around for longer than that. Xbox 360, 2005. Blu-rays, they came out in 2006. Twitter in 2007. Hulu, probably a lot of people are familiar with that. It's another um, uh, film supplier, provider, much like Netflix. Windows 7 came out in 2009 and Office 2010 in 2010. And it just goes on and on and on. You just continue. So between 2010 and 2020, I'm not sure what else we was created since then. Let's see, we have Twitter. Hmm. We might include X in there. Um, okay, so another useful graphic that you might run into is a pie chart. Pie charts show divisions, relationships, and parts of a whole. A writer might use a pie chart to show how much a person's income is devoted to the costs like housing and food as compared to entertainment and clothing. Or in our example here, favorite type of movie. So they must have done a poll on this. Sci-fi, 20% of the people said that sci-fi was their favorite type of movie. Only 4% said comedy. Hmm. Oh, sorry. That's not right. 20% said comedy. So the same for sci-fi and comedy. Action. Hmm. Action is next highest with 25%. And then guess what? Well, you know if you're looking at the screen what the highest favorite type of movie was among those who were polled. Romance. Hmm. But the lowest of all of them, which we didn't mention, was drama at 5%. Now, totally, when you add up all the percentages, they should be 100%. Okay. Oh, on the next page, on page 32, we have bar graphs. Bar graphs compare different amounts, quantities, or levels. In the adjacent example that we're looking here, the writer is using a bar graph to compare income for a business in 3 different years. Each color represents a different element: revenue, expenses, and profit loss. If you want to show change over time as opposed to differences in a few different years, you'd use the next graphic, which is a line graph. But we'll take a look at our graphic here first. All right, so we have our title, the cookie shop, and underneath that is the dates. So we can put everything into some kind of context. Now, we know right away that this is a historical date, 2003, 2004, like that's over 20 years ago. We'd want a graphic that's more recent. What else do we have here? Okay, so we have all the dates here are broken down with the titles on what we call our x-axis, the axis going from left to right. We have 2003, 2004, and 2005, just like our title says. Okay. Then we look up here in this menu item and it says total revenues. That's the purple or the light purple box. Total expenses, the dark purple, and the green is profit loss. Okay, so each of these bars represent total revenues, total expenses, and profit loss. And we have that for each of the 3 years. Then on the y-axis over here, we have the actual value of the revenues, expenses, and profit loss in dollars, right? See the dollar sign there? Starting at 0, going up to $90,000. Now we'll look at the line graph. Line graphs show change over time. A writer would use this when he or she wanted to really make change over time visible. A writer can affect the reader's perception of the information by using a different scale on the x or y axis. This is true for the bar graph as well. If my scale started at minus 28 degrees, you wouldn't see such a dramatic difference between the highs and lows. Think about this when you read or create graphics. All right, so what they're referring to here is look on this y-axis here, right? So if we would have included everything from 1 to 18, our graph would have been way up. We would have had all this huge empty space and might have taken 2 pages to put in this graph. So what the author did was just skip 0 to 18. This is the temperature, right? So from 0 to 18 degrees, I guess that would be Celsius. It's not relevant. So we're trying to show the difference between these points. So the other information, well, there's no points in between 0 and 18, so they're not really that important. It's not really that important to include it. And now when we look at all these points, we can say, oh yeah, okay, so it goes from 25 up to 28 and then down to 19 and then back up to, right up here, back up to 27. So if we get a good idea of the jump and then the dip and then the jump again. That wouldn't change if we included the temperatures of 0 to 18. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and up to 18. That wouldn't change this relationship. This relationship shows the change in temperatures from Sunday to Saturday. So in a way, it's truncated. They call it truncated when you shorten things down where it doesn't really matter if you do or not. But you have to be careful for that because if you put the wrong type of information in there, it might give people the wrong impression. Especially, let's say if you had values in there like monetary values like here. Whenever you start, what would when would what would happen if you started the y-axis at 15 or 10,000? All of these would drop down. Maybe it wouldn't matter that much because you're looking at the values, the peak values of these bars, and we're not really comparing them. Strategies for reading graphic text on page 33. When reading a text, we generally read from left to right, top to bottom. But we don't necessarily read graphic text this way. So first, orient yourself to the graphic. Where is the title? Like other texts, the title will give you an idea of what the graphic is about. Okay, so in our example here, Autumn National Temperature Departures and Long-Term Trend, 1948. Number 2, have any sources been provided for the information? Is the data recent? Is the source reliable? Okay, down at the bottom here of our example, the source is listed here as Environment Canada. And they're a pretty reliable source. Follow the flow of the graphic, paying attention to any arrows or labels that may be present. Okay. we're doing that. Okay, so we're looking at, right, 0 degrees Celsius right here, minus in this y-axis. It goes from 0 in the middle here all the way up to 4 and then down to minus 4. Okay? Year is on the x-axis here, 1945 to 2015. And we notice that there's a trend here going upwards. This line of spaces, with spaces, is moving up from just below 0 right up to over 1 in roughly 60 years. So this kind of signifies a trend, even though all of the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys, you wonder how they measure this, right? So they do averages. Sometimes graphic text stand on their own, but they are often used to add clarity to written text. In this case, in if this is the case, connect the graphic to the text you read. How does it help support the written information? So when we're creating a graphic text, once again, we have to consider the audience and purpose. Consider how much the audience already knows about the subject. The amount of knowledge you have will determine the language you use, the way you label your graphic, and the amount of detail you can use in your graphic. Think about what you want the reader to be able to do with the graphic you present. This will determine the type of graphic you choose. Do you want readers to compare information? Then you might want a bar graph or a table. Do you want to show process? Then you might want a flowchart. The type of graphic you choose will depend on the type of information you want to convey. If you are writing a procedure, you may want to use a flowchart to indicate a sequence of steps. If you're trying to show the difference in data plans from different wireless providers, you may want to use a bar graph. Most word processing programs contain tools to help you create professional-looking graphics. In Word, for example, you can choose Insert and then select Chart to get started. It's best to experiment with different types of charts before you have to create one for a project. Another great program for creating charts is the spreadsheet program that comes with Microsoft Office, and that is called Excel. But we also have a spreadsheet program in Docs as well, Google Docs. So there are a lot of them out there, and they often do have functions where you can change some data, information that you have in a table already, into a number of different types of charts that help people visualize all of the numbers that are entered into the table. Sometimes we look at these tables and go, whoa, wow, and our eyes gloss over. But if we see a chart, it makes it much more easier to understand. This is called data visualization, and tomorrow we're going to look at that in some detail, comparing different tables and different figurative It's a figurative text. Anyways, but no, we're not going to cover that tomorrow. We're going to cover that next week. And so, yeah, that's the plan. So next week we'll look more at graphics. If you have any questions about what we discussed today, then contact me, please. So for the weekend, you have key question 26, the novel analysis questioning character. A few things I want to point out here before we finish off today. Don't forget to write an introductory sentence and explain what you are writing about. And for every paragraph that you write, make sure that you have a topic sentence. Okay? All right? So, the paragraphs in the first paragraph, for instance, in the introduction paragraph, we have to explain what we're going to be discussing in the following writing. So this is going to be 500 words, so it'll probably be several paragraphs. And a brief introduction to get us started, and then each paragraph might be, in this example, you might have a paragraph on round characters, describing characters that are round. And then in another paragraph, you might have, or you might be describing characters who are flat. Right? So it asks for, let's see. Okay, so you may have a number of examples of characters who are round. Generally, it's your protagonist, though, but sometimes you can also include your antagonist or one other character that is really important in the development of the plot. And then you might include all of your flat characters and use page numbers and references to actually support what you say about your flat or round characters. Okay? All right, so that's just a little bit of housekeeping. But for now, you should probably be quite busy with completing that key question over the weekend. In the meantime, try to get whatever assignments you have done sent in. If you don't do so well on an assignment, you can always redo it after I give you some suggestions and straighten you out on where you might have gone or you might have erred. Otherwise, have a great holiday weekend. And I did make a mistake. I said coming back Monday, but yeah, it's the May 24th weekend or Victoria Day weekend. And so we get an extra day off. It's a 3-day weekend. Everyone enjoy. It's supposed to rain all weekend, but if you like fishing, it's also the opening of walleye season as well. Anyways, that's all we need to cover for today. Have a great weekend. Have a great long weekend, everybody. And we'll talk again Tuesday at the same time. Bye for now.